Welcome back to So Much and More to Say. My name is Nefemi, and I am very happy that you are here to listen. So, on this episode, I will be talking about I the Executioner, which is originally called Veteran 2, but for international audiences, I the Executioner is the title. But before I get into I the Executioner, I have to talk about the film that comes first, which is Veteran 1. Veteran 1 is an action comedy that was written and directed by Ryu Seung-won. I'm going to once again beg for forgiveness in any way I mess up the pronunciation of any name or anything in this episode. But yes, it was directed and written by Ryu Seung-won, and it came out in 2015. And it follows Detective Sodo Chol and his team of other detectives who work to take down a really rich, really powerful, really awful, really sinister, really wicked, really villainous rich guy after a friend of the detective is mistreated by his company. So basically, in Veteran 1, the detective's friend works for, I think, a contractor of the company of the rich guy, and something happens. He doesn't get paid the rightful amount, and so, oh, wait, if I remember correctly. Okay, I originally watched Veteran like 4 years ago, so it's been a while, but I rewatched it this week, and I believe what happened is the friend of the detective, I think him and a bunch of other people get let go, but I don't think they're fairly compensated. So the friend is like, I'm gonna get my money. I got bills to pay, so I need to get my money. So he goes to his boss and says, can you pay me my fair amount? The boss is like, nothing I can do for you. Sorry. So the friend basically says, okay, whatever. And he decides to go to the big man in charge, which is the really horrible, really wicked, really villainous rich guy. He goes to the company and basically asks him, can you pay me what I'm owed? And the really horrible guy acts really horribly, and in everything that happens, unfortunately, the friend winds up in a coma, and the company tries to pass it off as if it was a suicide. And the detective basically realizes something isn't right because the son, unfortunately, had to witness part of the really horrible acts that the company did towards the dad. And so when the detective talks to the son, he realizes something isn't right here. So he starts working with his team to figure out exactly what happened and also take down the really horrible guy. So that's basically the plot of the first film. And Veteran is really enjoyable. Is my chair squeaking? Okay. I apologize if you hear my chair squeak throughout this episode. But yeah, so that's the plot of the first film. And both times I watched Veteran, the first time like 3 or 4 years ago, I gave it a 3 out of 5. Second time around, I also give it a 3 out of 5. It's really enjoyable. It's really fun. It's very comedic. Um the cast has like really good chemistry with each other, and the comedic moments are really delivered well. And there's enough of a balance between seriousness and um the comedy. So it was very fun, very exciting, but it just gets a 3 from me. But I did enjoy it. So now we jump a few years into the future and we come to I the Executioner. So I the Executioner came out in 2024, which is about 9 years after Veteran 1 comes out. And a time jump is used within the film. I believe the film is set in 2022 because I vaguely remember seeing a timestamp for a video in the sequel, and it was December 2022, if I remember correctly. But I know that there has to be a significant time jump because in the first film, the detective's son is on the younger side, and in the second one, he is now in high school. But I'm not sure what stage of high school, but he's at least in high school. I know that much. So I the Executioner was also written and directed by Ryu Seung-won, and it was also written by Ewon Jae. And it sees the return of Detective Soda Chol and his team as they hunt down a vigilante responsible for a series of murders. In order to help them solve this, they inquire the help of a rookie police officer called Park Sun-woo. So I the Executioner has many strong aspects of it. One is definitely the fight scenes. The fight scenes are choreographed so well and they were acted and edited so well. And the best fight scene in the whole film is one that takes place on the rooftop in the rain. And I think that scene alone deserves its own award. I think, yeah, it was just awesome. The fight choreographer did a really great job. I think hand-to-hand combat, hand-to-hand combat, where there's a lack of like people using, weapons and hiding behind something and then trying to like aim and fire at each other from like across the room. I think those fight scenes are not nearly as exciting as the ones where the characters get to fight, hand to hand, and they have to like dodge punches and they have to like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it as well, but I think those kind of fight scenes are a lot more fun and entertaining. And another strong aspect of the sequel is definitely the performances given by the cast. The main character, Detective Sora Chol, portrayed by Hwan Jung-min, he does an excellent job. And I think it's great that we were able to see his character. We got to see more of his personal family side since his son has a more prominent um space in this film. He takes up a more prominent space in this film, and we see how the son, now being in high school, having to deal with bullies and school violence, takes a toll on him and then also takes a toll on the family. So we're able to see that side of Detective Saul, which I thought was great. And also, the cast of characters that comprise the detective team that he works with are always fun to watch. They have such great chemistry with each other, such great comedic timing, and every time they're always in a scene together, I just know it's going to be entertaining and really fun. The opening sequence for this film was I think it was a gambling house bust where they were rounding up people that were, I believe, gambling illegally, and just that scene alone was absolutely hilarious. And another cast performance that I would say is one of the most intriguing and eye-catching is the one delivered by Jung Hae-in in the role of Park Sun-woo. So I I don't think I prefaced this episode with a spoiler warning, but there will be spoilers in this film, in this episode, not in this film. But if you don't like spoilers, then you can pause and come back and listen after you've seen the film. Unless you're like my mom and you don't really care about spoilers, in fact, you ask for them, then you can keep listening or reading. But yes. So within the first 15 minutes of the film, the audience is made aware that the vigilante, popularly named Heichi, is none other than the detective Park Sun-woo, who's also nicknamed the UFC patrolman because he has a brave but quite aggressive way of handling perpetrators. And the nickname Heichi, I did a little research. And the Seoul Metropolitan Government website says that Heichi is a mythical creature that distinguishes between good and bad and what is right and wrong. So it kind of falls in line with his vigilante persona that the public gives him. And so Sonu's character, despite coming off really friendly and almost, I wouldn't necessarily say innocent, but just coming off as like a regular, friendly, nice guy, he also comes off really eerie and equal parts scary when necessary, which I think is great for the character, but unsettling when you're watching the film because you kind of like something is not all the way right with this man. Um, but yeah, I think the major thing about I the Executioner that I was left with whenever I watched it for the first time, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a qualm, but it definitely kept my brain turning, and it was Sonu's characterization. Because when I the Execution, okay, and I'll speak on this more from the perspective of when I first watched the film, because the second time I watched it, I was able to see um well, I had a lot more information the second time around when I watched it. So I was able to see, oh, okay, I probably missed this when I watched it the first time. But anyway, when I the Executioner opened, Heiji is presented as a vigilante that deals justice where he sees fit, where the justice system has failed. And this is seen by his decision to give perpetrators the exact same death as their victims. So we see that he's somebody that seems to be passionate about justice. And whenever, we realize that Sonu is also a police officer, it adds more to this idea of like, okay, they're presenting him as an anti hero, as somebody who zealously cares about wrongdoings being punished, and also somebody that maybe distrusts the judicial system to an extent. But I had to start questioning Sonu's psyche when he relentlessly and really violently tries to kill two characters that are presented as fake Hitchis. The first is presented by an unethical reporter who's just looking for views and money, but then the second one is presented by Sonu himself. And I mean, understandably, from his perspective, if the fake Hitchi dies, then the real one can continue doing whatever he wants to do. But then I just kept thinking, why would an injustice hating vigilante want to frame and kill people that, in the eyes of the law, haven't done anything wrong? What really confused me was when Sonu used Detective So's son as bait because earlier in the film, he saved the son from bullies, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, he's doing a great thing. That's so nice. And then turns around and uses the son um as bait for the detective. So whenever that is like his identity is found out by Detective Saw, he puts Detective Saw in a catch-22 situation where it's basically, save your son, but these two people die, or save this person, be seen as Hitchi, and I think your son will live, but somebody here has to die. Basically, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but that's kind of the situation he gets put in. And he uses the detective's son as like bait for the detective. And I was like, okay, so maybe you are just a bloodthirsty individual who satiates his desire by going after bad guys. Because maybe he thinks those are the people that he can get away with killing easiest in society. Although that also proves itself to be wrong in the film. And yeah, I just couldn't understand. I just couldn't see why Heichi would go through so much trouble. Or maybe I should call him Sonu. I couldn't see why Sonu would go through so much trouble to deal out the same punishment to criminals and yet turn around and use an innocent kid as bait to frame the detective that took him under his wing. I mean, this is the same detective that he claims inspired him to join the force, if that wasn't a lie. So then I had to start asking myself the question, like, what is the line that Sonu won't cross? Like, what is his moral compass? Like, who is he and how does he actually think? So the second time I watched I the Execution, I was able to see more of the cracks in Sonu's character and see where it was less about him kind of dealing out injustice, and then more of him kind of just more of him kind of just, I guess, wanting to be the person in charge that got to decide who lived and who died, and also manipulate those around him to get what he wanted. The second time around, when I watched the film, I was able to notice things I didn't before, which was pretty cool. But I'll still talk about this film more from the perspective of when I first watched it. And I remember when I first watched it, I was thinking, if the director was intentionally trying to comment on social media users and the users' tendencies to create false realities for themselves, and I think he would have done an absolutely great job, but I don't think that's what he was going for. But Heichi's media presence is largely determined by how others perceive him and who they want him to be. Whereas the real Heichi isn't actually all that honorable. And there was nothing honorable about revenge murder to begin with anyway. But the society or this social media in the film was seeing him as like this like anti-hero. And they even came a point where they started voting on who Heichi should kill because they were just so frustrated with their justice system not dealing out justice the way they wanted. And so yeah, it reminded me of how on social media people really often create narratives for themselves based solely on the things that they are allowed to see. Because essentially certain information presented on social media is only presented in, okay, how do I phrase this? What am I trying to say? So I was reminded on social media of how people often create narratives for people or of things they see and believe their assumptions and what they desire to be true to actually be true when they're not seeing the full picture, only what they've been shown. On social media, the things people release, the things people post, oftentimes when people do that, they will heavily filter and edit things, and you only get to see what people want you to see. But then people will see that and they'll really run with it, jump to conclusions, and I don't know. Yeah, sometimes people will even create like whole ideas of who people are in their head, having never sat down and had a conversation with this person. Like I think it's hard to understand, or troubling, I would say, to see how people can like almost talk about, I would say, maybe celebrities or even like influencers or just people they've seen online that they've never sat in a room with, had a conversation with, or even observed for just 30 minutes face to face in an enclosed space. It's troubling, I would say, to see people like make judgments about those people and say like, oh yeah, they would never do this, or like, oh, I know this is why they did this, or like, oh, this is definitely blah blah blah. It's like you don't know these people. Kind of similar, I would say, to this film where everybody was championing Hechi, seeing him as like this great guy doing these great acts, but then when you actually got to see Hechi as a person and what he did, like with the detective's son, you're like, this guy is not, it's not all that, you know? And in a juxtaposing way and entertainingly enough, Detective Sodachol is everything that Sonu isn't, and he doesn't stray from his moral compass. And he does push a just line here and there. He's not all the way, I would say, morally perfect, but he is firm in his morality. And he even says to Sonu at some point, he says murder is murder. Because I think before the detective knew who Heichi was, and it seemed like they captured the fake, like the real Heichi, but it was a fake one. Sonia was like, be honest, like you're kind of sad that he's been captured. You were rooting for Heichi in a way, right? And then Detective Sodachol is like, are you crazy? He's like, murder is murder and catching perps is my job. And Detective Saul clearly sees the errors of the justice system and he harshly critiques it, but he doesn't undermine it. And this is seen when he rebukes his team for the murder of one of the perpetrators in this film, who was actually featured in the first film. He was the original boss, if you remember what I was saying earlier. He was the original boss that the friend of the detective went to get payment from and was like, can't do anything for you. But yeah, so that guy's in this film and he gets murdered by Hitchy, and the team is like rejoicing about it. But then Detective Soda Charles like, is there a good murder? Is there a bad murder? And so, in the midst of the turmoil of this film, it was really refreshing to see Detective Saw stand by his morals, no matter how hard it would have been. And I think even in the first film, in Veteran One, whenever he was trying to get justice for his friend, he faced so many setbacks because obviously, he was dealing with a really rich guy who had influence and power in different places. Like even within, I want to say, the police force, there were people who were working against him, if I remember correctly. But he still stood his ground and fought for his friends, and fought for justice for his friend. And then actually, when I was watching Veteran One, the first film, when I was watching it again, when I kept seeing Detective Saul pursue justice, get thrown back, but still come back and try and get justice for his friend. It reminded me of the parable in the Bible in Luke 18, where Jesus explains to the disciples the importance of praying and not giving up. And he uses the story of a widow who was constantly going to a judge, and she was always going to him saying, give me justice for my adversary. And it says that the judge was unwilling to hear the widow for a while. But then he said to himself, even though he doesn't fear God or respect people, because the widow kept pestering him, he's like, I will give her justice so that she doesn't wear me out by her persistent coming. And then Jesus says, listen to what the unjust says. Will God not grant justice to his elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay in helping them? And he says, I tell you that he will swiftly grant them justice. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? I think Luke 18, that parable is really, really, really interesting. So if you want to read it for yourself, that's Luke 18, verse 1 to 8. But yes, I was reminded of that when I watched this film, and when I watched the first film and I saw Detective Soda Charles' incessant pursuit of justice despite the setbacks that he was facing. And yeah, all in all, I think Executioner just, it really got me thinking about, justice and the justice system and what happens when the justice system doesn't work well and what happens when people aren't satisfied with the justice system. I think at the end of the day, a justice system has a responsibility to deal with cases justly, offering a good moderation between harsh and lenient sentences, and then also to look out for the best interest of the victim, but then also the perpetrator at the same time to make sure that justice is dealt, but then correction and rehabilitation is also delivered. And when the justice system fails, people become, hopeless. They become angry and they become desirous to see justice dealt in the way they see fit. But then when nobody has a set definition of what justice is and everyone's view is different, if everyone takes justice into their own hands in that case, then society will become lawless. I mean, we can see this crack in I the Executioner where there's one part where Sonu or I think the unethical not detective, the unethical reporter I mentioned earlier that set up one of the fake Hitchis, he releases information about a certain case where a woman was accused of killing her husband for an insurance payout, but it was fake. Like the news was false. Whether the journalist knew that, I can't remember for sure, but I remember the detective and his wife were talking about it because she works in like the social sector, so she helps people here and there, and she was helping out the woman that was accused, and she was telling her husband that all of this is like fake news and it's just a big misunderstanding, and the reporter was basically reporting it as like, this is what happened. So by the end of the film, when I said that, Detective Saul was putting a catch-22 situation, either save his son or save these people, the woman that was wrongfully accused is one of those people. And so Heichi like thinks he's dealing out justice for this woman, but the woman isn't actually guilty of the thing she's being accused. But yeah, anyways, like I was saying, or what was I saying? Yes, if everyone takes justice into their own hands and everybody has their own personal definition of what justice is, then there would no longer be a measurement of true justice. And when there is no measurement, justice becomes what people want it to be. And everybody wants something different. So then you're just, it's like society, like I said, society would almost become lawless and just become an anarchy. And when I watched *I, the Executioner* and I saw a character like Sonu, I just hoped it would encourage anybody in the justice system or in that sector could, see this film and desire to do a better job, honestly, a selfless job, because mm, I don't know, it's a touchy subject when it comes to justice and dealing it out well. I think since the beginning of time, justice systems have been unfortunately corrupt and not working well. There are parts of it that, they do a good job, but there are also parts of it where it doesn't do a great job. And yeah, it's really unfortunate, honestly. But I'm also reminded of Romans 12, verse 19, where it says, "Friends, do not avenge yourself. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it is written, 'Vengeance belongs to me. I will repay,' says the Lord." So I just thought I would mention that verse in case there's somebody here, um you're a Christian and maybe you're you're passing through something where you're being unfairly treated, and you're wondering, like, God, you know, how do I come out of this, or what do I do? How can I just do nothing? Remember Romans 12:19 says, God himself said, "Vengeance belongs to me, I will repay." So yeah, it can be a lot easier said than, like, put into practice. But when you really know the character of God and trust him, you know that he will deal with situations well and justly. I've definitely been there where I've been unfairly treated, but the love of God was just so strong in my heart. There was nothing else I could do except forgive and just give it to God, honestly. But yeah, justice, 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 justice. Well, all in all, I really enjoyed *I, the Executioner*. And based on the post-credits scene, it seems like there is a sequel in the works, but I'm not sure if it's going to focus on Park Sun-woo, even though it seems like it should. So the post-credits scene ends with a report saying that Sun-woo has been sentenced to life in prison, but on the way, I think, to wherever he was supposed to go, he escapes. So it seems like that might be the focus of the next film. But from what I've seen that's already in the works with Veteran 3, I haven't seen anything about Park Sun-woo's character at all. So, well, at least in the casting information that's been available so far, I haven't seen his character there. But we'll see. I would definitely love to see his character again. I'm definitely interested to see how Veteran 3 is going to come about. So yeah, all in all, the sequel got 3.5 stars from me. I really enjoyed it, and I think I mentioned that it's available for renting on Apple TV. In case I didn't, did I mention that? I think I mentioned that the first film, Veteran 1, is on Tubi. It might be on Netflix in some locations, but I know it's on Tubi. I watched it on Tubi, and then I rented *I, the Executioner* on Apple TV. I rented it the first time I watched it last year, and I had to rent it again this year. But we'll see if it ever comes out on another streaming service. But yeah, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and also for reading, in case you're reading this on Substack, which is another, well, not another announcement, but an announcement I have. I created a Substack account for my podcast. So, in addition to recording episodes, I also like to write them down. my podcast, it's been quite a journey. I was kind of really trying to see what was my voice, what my thing is. And I think I'm kind of still figuring it out, but I know for sure I do like to write um reviews. So you can read some of those on Substack. I have some up there already from previous episodes for the episode on Ditto, and then the episode on Godzilla minus one, and then I'll have the one for this episode. And I might also, be posting other reviews for films that I may not talk about on, you know, the episodes, but you can always go follow me on Substack and read what I have there and see what I'm watching and see what I'm interested in. So yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening or reading or listening and reading or watching on YouTube. Thank you for your time. Thank you for lending me your ear. I hope you have an amazing week, day, month, year, decade, century. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time with the next episode.